Okay, so in this example we're going to be moving away from the HTML for a little bit and encountering a language called JavaScript. JavaScript is used to add interaction to HTML pages, and it can be very complex, but at this point in time we're going to be using some very basic language to do some pretty simple stuff. Okay, so this section of the videos we're going to look at Introduction to JavaScript. We will look at handling, creating and using variables, and what a variable is. A variable is basically something that stores data which can then be manipulated to make things happen based on user input and usually responding by outputting information. In the next video we'll use some logic or some more complex logic to do some decision making, and then we'll do a video on functions, just creating our own first function. Then we'll move on to basic interaction, and hopefully the final video will culminate with creating a simple quiz. Okay, so I'll just show you what we're going to do in this first video before we move on. We're going to create a page that asks us if we'd like to log in. Allows us to enter our username and then tell us that we are logged in. And to do that we are using confirm, a prompt, some variables and write line. Okay, so I'm going to just clear that out for a second and we'll start from step 1. We've got a folder called JavaScript, well JS, short for JavaScript, and inside of that I've got example 1.html, the file I'll be working on. I've given it a title called JavaScript example 1, and now what I'm going to do is create some script. Now script technically usually goes in the head of a HTML document. Eventually we will be creating separate JavaScript files, but for now we're fine to work in the HTML document itself. So we use the tag script. Close that tag. Everything that comes between script and close script is JavaScript. So the first thing we're going to do is to create a variable. Now the way you do that is you give it a name, so I'll call it name. Equals, that is an assignment operator, so that allows me to assign a value to that variable in this case. In between inverted commas I will then put my name, which is a string of characters, so that's known as a string. And that is our very first variable. What I might want to do is just see that working, and we can use the debug window in the browser by talking to the console and using a function called log. And I'll just put name into there, like so. Save the file, and I'm going to test it in Chrome. Conspicuously the page is empty, there's nothing there. If I look at more tools and developer tools, you'll see that it's outputted the name there. We're only one step away from being able to output that into the page, and we can write things to the document by putting document.write or document write ln, stands for write line. So I'll just put name into that box there, and I'll comment out the console log. In HTML you get a different comment symbol, but in JavaScript it's just 2 forward slashes for a single line comment. I'll save that and refresh the page, and you will notice that it's disappeared from the console and now it appears in the page itself. So I'll close the console down. So as well as name, we could manipulate that variable, maybe by creating another variable called response, which could equal hello with a little space after it, plus name. So it can then take on the properties or the value of name and add those two things together. And instead of writing the line name, I'm going to write response. Save that. Back to the window. F5 to refresh, and there you see that it's outputted hello Adam. Very straightforward stuff. Quite basic. But now let's take it a little bit further and get some input. So what I'm going to do is, rather than name equaling Adam, it's going to equal prompt, which is a function in JavaScript. A question. Please enter username, followed by a comma for the next value, which we will leave blank at this point in time. That just sets the value that's defaulted into the text box when the prompt comes up. I'll save that. That's the page. F5. Please enter username, Olive Badger, and then hello Olive Badger. It can be quite easy to change the hello to logged in, as we'll see. Similar to that. And what we can also do is to use a confirm. Now, if I attach confirm to a variable, so we'll call it enter site equals confirm, and I'll just put a message in. Would you like to log in? I'll show you what I can do to start off with. So F5. The first thing I get is would you like to log in? I click OK, then it will make the value of that variable true. And if I click cancel, false. And if it's false, then the variable doesn't exist. So I click OK, carry on, and put a name in. Logged in, name. And the next step is to put a little bit of logic in there. So what I'm going to do is say that if enter site, and by simply putting that, it means if enter site has evaluated as true, then it will exist. Then do this. Ask for the username, and if not, then it does nothing. Save that. 5. OK, click cancel, nothing happens. If I refresh and click OK, it will allow me to put my username in. And it goes, logged in as Olive Badger. OK, so we'll just check that against that. We have outputted some information. We have used basic input, variables, manipulated data. The only thing we haven't done is worked with a number rather than strings. So we'll just quickly have a look at that. We can actually put a variable as a number instead of a string. So for example, 5. You notice that that doesn't have inverted commas because it's a number. That means it's treated differently to a string of characters. So right line response, and I think just after that, document, right line, and I'll just put in there number. So see what happens there. I guess I'd like to log in. Green dragon, and then green dragon and 5 has been outputted. We can also add a number to a string if, for example, I add it on by putting string and then inside of brackets number. It will turn that number into a string to allow it to be used with in1. Okay, and green dragon. And you'll notice that that's done the same thing essentially without the space created by the right line. Okay, and we will end the video there.